my pleasure now to introduce Fergus McCallan, who is a pharmacist involved in thrombosis for over 20 years, although now working as professional relationships manager with Techdow. And he's here to discuss low molecular weight heparins should be prescribed by their brand name, an intriguing title that I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about. Over to you, Fergus.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you very much. Thank you for agreeing to hear my presentation today. As described, I'm Fergus. I'm a pharmacist. 34, 35 years I've been a pharmacist. I've worked in primary care, secondary care, community pharmacy, pharmaceutical industry, so quite a broad experience. I have actually been involved in both low molecular weight heparin and biosimilars, probably 20 years plus for the first and 10 years plus for biosimilars. As I say, I am a professional relationships manager. I do work for Techdow. A little bit of just making things totally transparent. This is a sponsored promotional presentation on behalf of Techdow Pharma for Inhixa enoxaparin sodium. The important word there is sponsored. The second part is promotional. I'm employed to promote the medication. I obviously will be as balanced and honest as I possibly can, but that has to be clear. I'm a UK pharmacist. I'm employed by Techdow in a role, promotional role. So just clarity. And Techdow is, we pride ourselves in being a very reliable partner to the NHS. Next slide. So Inhixa enoxaparin is enoxaparin sodium. It's a solution for injection. You all know it. You all know enoxaparin. You all know low molecular heparin. Enoxaparin, to my knowledge, has been on the market in the UK for about 33, 34 years, so probably the same year as I qualified as a pharmacist. Its license has changed very slightly over the years, and obviously there are other things that you as medics, pharmacists, nurses may use, but the license indications are primarily prophylaxis and treatment of DVT and PE. Recently, enoxaparin and slightly earlier than that, other molecules extended their license into treatment of the DVT and prevention of its recurrence in patients with active cancer. Slight variations in some molecules' description of that. Also, prevention of thrombus in extracorporeal lines, which I've never actually been involved in, but it sounds interesting. And ACS, although I think that may be a less common indication. You've got on one side a little 3D barcode if you want to see the PI. If you want any more information that's not here, just send us a message and we'll get back to you with a more detailed answer. That particularly applies to anything that's not within the product license. We'll send it to the appropriate team and we'll answer you. However, although we're talking about enoxaparin, we're using it as an illustration for what is a biosimilar. And I was going to say it varies by where you stand. What I mean by that is it varies by country to country, and it varies whether the EMEA is regulating you, the MHRA, the FDA, etc. So even though some of us are not standing in the UK, and it's a very virtual conference, let's assume it's a generally UK audience, and we'll deal with how the UK regulators view this drug. What you have is conventional pharmaceuticals and generics. Conventional in the sense that they're chemical, they're created in a controlled environment, they're manufactured in the pharmaceutical plant, highly regulated by the FDA, EMA, MHRA. They're chemical processes. They're generally relatively small, and the big thing is if you get paracetamol 500 milligram tablets from one manufacturer or paracetamol 500 milligrams from another tablet, if they're both BP standard, the active ingredient will be paracetamol, it'll be 500 milligrams, it'll be the same. There may be some variations in the excipients or the packaging, the coloring, or the size or shape, but the active ingredient will be the same, the clinical effect will be the same. Then you go to biopharmaceutical medicines. They're created in a living biological system. That may be, for insulin, it may be the pancreas of an animal. for an oxyparin, it's the villi of another animal, villi of their intestine, sorry. It could be a single cellular molecule in a bioreactor. They are made in a living biological system. There's inherent variability. It depends how the organism is stressed. It depends on how nutrition over its life cycle. It can depend on the temperature in which it exists. It can depend on the humidity, the atmospherics, the altitude even. Many, many things lead to variations in that raw material. Then we go to biosimilars. So we've just described the biopharmaceutical complex, comes from a living organism. So a biosimilar is very similar. It effectively tries to manufacture a closely similar molecule to the originator. And the outcome is it's highly similar. A really annoying phrase, it's highly similar, but not identical to the reference medicine. If it was similar, it would be a generic. So it's highly similar. And that leads to all kinds of what on earth does that mean to say it's highly similar? Well, what's not similar? I think it's useful to sort of get in your head the difference in scale. This is an illustration of what an aspirin molecule would look like to my left. Hopefully it's your left as well. A small chemical entity. This is an antibody. Not sure which one it's meant to represent, but again, it represents a large, complex biological molecule, far, far, far larger. Very often, enormous parts of that structure will not actually be the active part of the molecule. There will be generally speaking, a large, if not the vast majority of the molecule won't be involved in the action on the receptor site. And it may well be there may be slight variation even in the active part of the molecule. So much, much bigger, much, much more complex, a degree of variability. I can go back to that, and I could say that, generally speaking, it's pretty much acknowledged that even in the originator, over time, batch by batch, there is also tiny, tiny variations in the complex molecule. So that's what I've tried to describe being what a biosimilar is. There's obviously, again, we're in the UK, so let's see what the UK regulator, the MHRA, says. A similar biological medical product, biosimilar, is a new biological product that has been developed to be similar to an existing biological product. The reference product. Quite wordy. Again, this annoying similar, not quite, but similar. EMEA, I know we've left Europe. However, the EMEA is a well-known established regulator. A biosimilar is a biological medicine highly similar to another already approved biological medicine, the reference medicine. So again and again and again, we hear this word highly similar, but not identical. I didn't expect that there. So, but yes, not identical. So we have statements that these are highly similar. From a physician's point of view, from a nurse's point of view, from a pharmacist's point of view, is there a difference? Or can we go back a stage? Why should we prescribe a biosimilar by brand? Well, there's an obvious answer, because the regulator says so. The MHRA has, in November 2022, probably for its 6th, 7th time, issued guidance, and very, very, very clear, all biological medicines, including biosimilars, should be prescribed by brand name. If you look at the other piece on the other side, again, substitution at the pharmacy level without consulting the prescriber is not permitted for biological medicines, including biosimilars. Pretty strong continuing position that biosimilars should be written by brand. In this same guidance, there is a very, very clear, reassuring statement, more clear than it has been for the last 7 or 8 years, which effectively says a physician prescribing a biosimilar can expect the same clinical outcome. So, okay, it's because the regulator says so. They're still pretty similar. Why am I having to do this? Not quite there to convincing myself even why it's an absolute. Although I'm a pharmacist and I'm thinking the regulator says so. So that's quite important. But why? Maybe if we go back to enoxaparin, because that's what I'm an expert in, enoxaparin in the form of Anhixa. Many of you here will work in secondary care. Some of you work in primary care. Starting with secondary care, trusts, or if you live in Wales or Scotland or Ireland, health boards choose a particular brand through a buying process. In England, it's the Commercial Medicines Unit. So there's a big, weighty commercial procurement exercise, and trusts choose one of the 4 available brands of enoxaparin. They choose it on multiple things: clearly price, supply chain, historical reliability to supply, simplicity of the device, patient support materials. The point being, they come to a decision, and be it for 2 years or 4 years, or in some cases I've known for 20 years, that hospital will stock one brand of enoxaparin. And largely speaking, if a hospital physician or a hospital nurse or a prescribing pharmacist writes a brand name for enoxaparin, in most hospitals, that will result in a line being put through it, it being written as the brand name, or perhaps that won't happen, and perhaps there'll just be an acceptance that it should be written generically in the hospital, and whether it's written by INN or why it's been written by brand, the brand that the hospital has chosen to use will be the brand supplied. So to some extent, the problems that can arise for enoxaparin arise less often in the hospital, because the hospital's governance, the reality is there is only one brand of enoxaparin in the hospital. And no doubt, if a consultant or a nurse was to go down to the pharmacy and explain why a patient needed a different brand of enoxaparin, perhaps that would occur. I've been involved with enoxaparin for a very long time, and I don't know what that exception looks like. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I've never come across it. Perhaps I genuinely haven't come across it. I mean, the obvious one is perhaps a patient was admitted already on another brand. The problems occur in discharge. Patients, as you all know, start on enoxaparin. They may complete the course in hospital, or they may go home. When they're discharged, they'll often be given a discharge summary, electronic or paper. And a lot of hospital doctors, hospital prescribers, prescribing nurses, prescribing pharmacists still use generic names, INN names. That causes problems for GPs, and it causes problems for community pharmacists, and it causes problems for patients. And you might say, what kind of problems does it cause? Well, let's start with, I wasn't expecting that. Again, we'll discharge by brand, and then let's try and work out the problems. As part of that procurement process, pharmaceutical companies offer hospitals a level of support. We generally put trainers into hospitals on a regular basis to match the rotations of staff, new intakes of staff, temporary staff, and we continually re-educate healthcare professionals, largely nurses, but also others, how to use the device, and more importantly, how to train patients before they're discharged how to use the device. And we also supply a lot of patient support leaflets, support videos, patient cards to carry with them to remind them, materials to help patients to manage their drug at home, and materials to help nurses train patients how to manage at home. That is one of the important things to remember as part of the procurement process. It comes with patients being trained and patients going home. And unlike insulin, it's not a thing for life generally. A lot of insulin patients know how to use injections because they've been on injections for a long, long time. This can be people who've never had any experience of self-injecting. So they get to a level of competency and they go home. There are 4 brands of enoxaparin in the UK. The syringes superficially look quite similar. You might look at these and think they look the same. And then you look again, you'll see some subtle differences, different barrel thickness, different plunger, some different color codes. But you might still think largely the same. If we talk about Inhixa has been designed, both these devices have an automatic safety guard. Inhixa has been designed so that you give the injection, you pull back, then you press a second time and the guard deploys. There are other subtle differences, but that's quite a dramatic one. The reason for that is that when we designed it, we felt it would be better if the guard deployed, which it does at quite a rate of knots, away from the patient's skin. We were cognizant that patients bruise easily. We were cognizant that enoxaparin can cause bruising, injections can cause bruising. We didn't fancy the idea of a piece of plastic traveling at knots hitting the skin. And I've seen moon-shaped, half moon-shaped bruises on patients on low molecular heparin before. Another brand has, and I'm not being critical at all, another brand has a different technique where the device deploys as soon as the drug is given. So it deploys at or near the skin surface. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a difference, but it's a difference. And one of the things that without training is that patients and nurses will often think that the guard doesn't deploy if they're not aware of that second click. So there are differences, and it goes far beyond just the deployment of the guard. Again, I can hear, well, I can't hear because I can't hear you, but I can hear howls of protest. All the brands have a range of 6 or 7 strengths, and the color codings, it should be the same. Any common sense person would imagine they'd be the same, but the reality is they're not. And again, there's an argument that you shouldn't be relying on color coding to drive your decisions on what you pick up, what you inject. But it's not helpful to have different colors, especially if you've got a patient at home who's not an HCP, who's not been trained not to solely rely on colors. If they get a different color from their chemist, they may wonder, have I got the right drug? It's not helpful. Another thing is on the higher strengths of enoxaparin, both the number of graduations between each 10 milligram, so on a 150 milligram syringe, the number of graduations between 140 and 150 milligram is different in different brands. It may be 5, it may be 4. You may be moving up in 2 milligram gradients of 0.25 milligram. They're not the same. The concentrations are not the same. Whether it's 100 milligram per mil or 100 milligram per 1.5 mil, that varies as well. Again, for someone who's learned the technique of how to draw up a partial dose, gives them a partial dose, it doesn't help to have different graduations, different concentrations, different color codes, different syringes they haven't been taught on. All these things do not help very, very new patients, people who are very, very new to self-injecting at home. You've got to think to yourself, so what drives particularly GPs and practice nurses and prescribing pharmacists in the community, what drives them to want to write enoxaparin rather than the brand name? Bearing in mind the regulator says prescribed by brand, bearing in mind the patient's being trained on one device, bearing in mind the differences, what's driving many, many GPs to write the INN? Possibly not a realization it's a biosimilar. That's possible. I would think that a large part of what GPs are doing is they're trying to be good corporate members of their ICB, of their practice group. They are imagining that using the INN, using a generic name saves money. It's something that practice pharmacists, medicines managers, perhaps for 20 years have been coming along and, metaphorically speaking, slapping about the chops, telling doctors to prescribe generically. I think generally they're trying to do the right thing. And GPs are not experts in reimbursement, but in primary care, enoxaparin is a category C drug. What that means in very, very simple terms is that the government reimburses chemists at the price of the originator, regardless of which brand the chemist actually provides. The reimbursement stays the same and the cost to the NHS stays the same. So it achieves no cost saving at all by doing this. The cost saving, if it's imagined, in fact, simply leads to the patient getting a device that may look different, in contravention of the sort of expected, the expectation from pharmacists is that they don't receive a prescription written by INN. The Royal Pharmacy Society says at the point of dispensing, the pharmacist needs to confirm what biologic the patient expects. If the patient doesn't know what they expect, then they're going to have to phone the GP or they're going to have to phone the hospital. It adds work. The GPHC says, again, the pharmacist can't substitute. It's creating workload for the patient, for the pharmacist, for the original prescriber. It doesn't help. It doesn't save money. It is not, has no purpose. There is a slight, some community pharmacists are contractors. They have to make part of their revenue from procuring below the drug tariff price. It may well be that a community pharmacist can find a brand on a particular date for a particular wholesaler that is less expensive than the drug tariff. There may be a profit to be made. That, however, is not, as the General Pharmaceutical Council says, the community pharmacist should do what's in the patient's best interest. It's not in the best interest to give them a medicine that they haven't been trained on, and really looking at the regulator's advice, it should never have been written that way in the first place. There is very, very few, if any, positives to doing this. Unfortunately, when we look at hard facts, the prescribing data in the UK, my apologies, in this case in England, it indicates that 72% of all initiations for enoxaparin in hospital are in HICSA. Hopefully a reflection of our price, our service, our reliability. Yet that translates to 37% of prescriptions dispensed in the community being in HICSA. And again, if you look at another brand, it's 26% in hospital, but 50% in the community. A third one, 2%, and then 13%. In reality, that is showing that the original initiated brand did not continue in primary care. And that is largely caused by using the INN, where the community pharmacist doesn't know what brand to give. The patient might not know, the conversation might not happen, or a decision has been made that there's a profit or procurement to be made in the pharmacy, which is not passed on to the NHS. It is not great that over half the patients who were meant to or were intended to have in HICSA get a different biosimilar, and that has saved not one penny for the NHS and has left patients with a device in particular that they may not fully understand. And some community pharmacists may take the time to fully demonstrate how that device is given, although we very rarely get asked for dummy devices. We get asked for thousands upon thousands of dummy devices a year in hospital, which are used in training purposes. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do the voting part of this. The original intention was to have 3 or 4 questions and look at a vote. So I don't know if Jo's still here. I don't know if she's able to see if people are making comments on this as we go along.
No, but
Jo,
please invite them. If they put up their hands, I can have a look and see if I can estimate the numbers.
oh, okay, that'd be good. So I mean, I think I've only got 3 questions, or there might be a 4th. So it's established that biological medicines should be prescribed by brand. I hope I'm not being arrogant when I say it's established. It's established in the fact that we live and work in the UK. That's the regulator's position. I wondered if the group think, having listened to my hopefully meaningful explanation, should ICB medicine, so should medicines management in primary care, should their pharmaceutical staff, should their advisors, should their clinical GP leads be addressing the issue that up to half of the enoxaparin dispensed that community pharmacy level is not the original biological medicine intended, and a different biosimilar has been substituted. So is that something that should be of concern to medicines managers in primary care?
We have a few hands up.
Okay. I presume that would be a sort of acknowledgement that that's a possibly important thing. Let me go to the next slide then. Many patients will have been trained to administer enoxaparin with a specific device. And that is because of the hard work, again, obviously on some occasions by doctors and pharmacists, but on a lot more occasions, it's the hard work of the nurses that are helping discharge. The patients are trained usually over 1 or 2 days. Again, my understanding is that the patient first couple of days may have it administered by the nurse, and then gradually begins to administer themselves, and is trained, is given materials. As I've already said, the NHS does not save money in primary care if a different brand is given in a different device. And again, the question is, prescribing data shows that in primary care in England, 35.5% of enoxaparin FP10s, i.e. prescriptions, were prescribed by INN. So written generically, is this okay? I hope that's the right way to spell okay. I'm not entirely convinced it is. Is this okay?
So people want to put up their hands if they agree. Not many hands up there at all, no.
Okay then. Thank you for that. Let me just check. I've got one more question or two. I've got one more question. So it's established that again, sorry, I keep on saying it's established. I believe it is established. I mean, I wish I perhaps said the regulator has stated that biological medicine should be prescribed by brand. Again, no assertion there that any prescribers are totally free to choose the biosimilar they want. But once a patient is started, is substitution of a branded biological prescription a dispensing error? Is it wrong for a community pharmacist to, again, there is advice from their own professional bodies, my professional body, sorry, to establish what brand the patient has and to give that brand. Is it an error to dispense a different biosimilar or the originator?
We've got a couple of hands up there.
Okay. That's the only question that's the only, but they are questions. That's the last of my 3 questions. Again, I personally, as I say, I've been involved in biosimilars and with enoxaparin for a very long time. I do see that patients who understand their devices buy into the treatment and perhaps continue longer. Just the final thing is, again, as I said, I am promotional, so I want to get across there is no extra cost for any primary care physician who writes by brand name. And again, I want to say that since Techdow launched over 4.5 years ago, we have never been out of stock, never. We only make one drug, and we'd ask you to prescribe and discharge by brand. If there's any time left and if there's any comments, I would be more than happy to take a stab at answering them. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Fergus. As people here will know, I don't have a medical background, but I found that very interesting.
Thank you.
And an important area, which obviously, certainly if I was presenting as a patient, I would be unaware of, but I can imagine how questions when things turn up in different boxes or operate in different ways suddenly get you worried. Something with low molecular weight heparins, I'm aware some hospitals try to prescribe them themselves so that somebody being discharged goes with them. Do you think that's one option to get over this? But I know that doesn't happen everywhere, and I don't know what your experience of that is.
No, it's a really interesting question. It does happen, and I can clearly understand that if someone's only got another 3 or 4 days to go, it makes a lot of sense. can understand that in some areas it may be financially beneficial to give 1 or 2 weeks drugs. And again, I have personally observed, as I say, I have been involved in Oxyparin for 20 years. I have observed patients, and I don't know if these things still exist, I'm showing my age. I've observed patients go home with a pamper box full of drugs, 60, 70, 80 syringes to last 3 months. And I don't think that is a safe practice. I don't think it's a good practice. It's a lot of medication in the house. With the best will in the world, that patient may not finish that course. They may change the therapy. They may be readmitted. They may pass away. It depends. I can see it. I can definitely see it being a useful practice for a short number of days to allow the patient to complete a short course and/or to give them 7 to 10 days to make an appointment with their GP and continue. Yes, it gets silly when patients are taking 3 or 4 carrier bags of drugs to their car.
I certainly understand what you say. There's a fine balance, isn't there?
There's a fine balance. Yeah.
I know you touched on this at the beginning, but recognizing some of these issues and concerns in this, is there ongoing training and also patient information so that individuals are made aware of what they have and how they use it, that your company can offer? Yes,
absolutely. As I say, Techdow continue to have a sales force. So the sales force, because they're promotional reps, but I would say 80 to 90% of what they now do is they work with hospitals. They go into hospitals. They give training to healthcare professionals, either on Zoom or Teams. They do it in person. They pre-arrange it. They do ad hoc. They have demonstration syringes. They have demonstration dummy tummies. They have materials, as I say, both video materials online and hard booklets to help patients. So our company is massively supportive of our sales force, spending most of the time training HCPs to train patients and then to give materials for patients. And in fact, I am 99% certain that we would, if hospitals do occasionally change brands, I am 99% certain that we would not accept a hospital that would not allow us to train the entire nurse team first, because we know the differences and we think that not accepting training will lead to incidents. There is differences in the technique, and I am 99% certain that we would not allow a hospital to come across and use our brand without an initial significant training of their staff, so that the majority of staff knew how to use the device, so they could train on patients. So yes, training is absolutely at the core of our belief.
Thank you. And I think that comes back to a theme that's run through almost every session this week: the utmost importance of communication with colleagues and with the individuals that you're caring for. And as you've highlighted then, ideally using correct names, but also giving that information in discharge letters or notes, so that both professional colleagues and that individual patient or their family, their carer, whoever's involved in this, can present it, can share it with their GP, their local pharmacist, can be well informed that this is what I've used, because inadvertently harm through expecting it to work in one way and it doesn't can otherwise result. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for allowing me to present. I'm really very, very grateful, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.